We have an interesting afternoon today. We're going to make this panel be a little bit more reflective, hence our seating arrangement. Having our panelists be reflective, asking us to be reflective, and hopefully seeing the model and the patterns of reflection for our larger community, thank you, and our institutions. So I would like to begin by welcoming my dean, the Dean of International Studies, to say a few remarks. Ambassador Christopher Hill is the Dean of the Joseph Covell School of International Studies here at the University of Denver, which is a position he's had since September 2010. He's a former career diplomat and a four-time ambassador, including the ambassador to the Republic of Korea, the ambassador to Poland, to the Republic of Macedonia, and he was also the special envoy to Kosovo. His last post was as ambassador to Iraq from April 2009 to August 2010. Prior to Iraq, he also served as Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs from 2005 to 2009, during which he also was the head of the U.S. delegation to the six-party talks on the North Korean nuclear issue. So no stranger to conflict and to historical kinds of events. I do know he also is a longtime student of history. So please welcome Ambassador Christopher.
Well, thank you very much, Tamara. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's really a pleasure to take part in this, I think, very important conference to discuss the legacy of this Sand Creek Massacre. Now, there are those who say 150 years ago is a long time, but I've lived in parts of the world where 150 years is but a blink of the eye. To talk about the Sand Creek Massacre 150, which took place 150 years ago, I would put as Exhibit A place I dealt with, which was Kosovo, where there was something called the Battle of Kosovo, which took place in 1389, and yet you would think it just happened last Tuesday because of the discussion about who fought on what side and for what cause they were fighting. And so this issue of trying not only to get the baseline of facts correct, but also to understand the intervening 150 years, how people feel about these things, why they feel about them, and what are the ways that people can go forward, I think is very critical. And I think it is really one of those issues in life that really needs to be addressed in a spirit of mutual respect and a spirit of real dialogue, where if you are talking more than 50% of the time, you're probably losing. So that is doing a lot of listening. There is no question that this Sand Creek Massacre, which is actually, I was talking to some people at lunch, it is so central, really, not only to the founding, really going back to the founding of the University of Denver, but also the entire town of Denver, and I would say really the state of Colorado. In 1864, obviously, there are other things going on in the United States, and to understand Sand Creek in that context, to understand Colorado in that context, I think is very important. So understanding history is not just sort of dwelling in the past, but rather shining a light on the future. So I think we have a tremendous panel here who will be shortly introduced, but I just want to say that when you look at democracy, I know everyone says it's about elections. True, you cannot have a democracy without elections. I would argue the essence of democracy, though, is institutions. Institutions that are sturdy, institutions that seek truth, and institutions that really help provide the sort of solid foundation which allows us to build further in this world. So I think we have some representatives here today who represent these great institutions here in Denver, and I think are absolutely well positioned to discuss issues, whether 150 years ago or 1,500 years ago. So look forward to a great discussion, and I'm looking to camera to see what I'm supposed to do with this microphone.
Hi, my name is Nancy Wadsworth, and I'm chairing this committee, or this panel. I served as chair of the DU, John Evans Study Committee, and I am an associate professor of political science here at DU. And as Tamara indicated, the vision for this gathering is that it would be less a formal panel with presentations and kind of stiff, tight recaps of what people have done, and more an opportunity, a venue for people to really reflect about what it means for institutions to try to make sense of the past, to try to take that understanding into the present, and to think collectively about what it means for our futures and for the relationships we might build. So for that reason, we opened it up as a conversation in the round. And so here I'll just briefly introduce what we're going to do, and then I'll introduce each panelist, just so everyone has a sense of the flow again. And feel free to remind me, if you want those questions laid out again, we can do that. I will briefly introduce everyone and sort of some basics of what their institutions did with regard to the Sand Creek Massacre commemoration process. I also want to recognize that there are a lot of institutions and bodies that also did things that could have been at this panel. This was our decision was to start here with what had happened in DU, and because we had the governor's office and the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs down the road, to start here, to start with the communities we got to know, but the National Park Service, communities in Boulder, the Quakers. There are other communities who did work like this, and so we hope this is just the beginning of a larger conversation. So after I provide these summaries, I'd like to invite Gail and Joe, to whom I'll briefly introduce you, to offer your brief reflections on sort of, given what these different institutions and the state did, and the processes they engaged in, the outcomes they produced, what would you say was most important for you, for your communities, and for the descendants in general? And then we'll go to a set of questions for each panelist about these institutional reflections. So what does it mean for an institution to try to acknowledge an event from 150 years ago? What is important about attempting to do so? What is challenging about it? What did you learn are obstacles or minefields, if any, in doing so? What would you share with other institutions or larger communities that might be interested in addressing something difficult from their past? So what have we learned, or are we learning? I think for most of us, we feel like we're at the beginning of the process, even after 2 years or many more years in the case of the United Methodist. What can we share at this stage for others who might be willing to take something like this on? Okay, so for introductions, Joe Big Medicine is sitting in the center of the group. He is Southern Arapaho. He is a Sand Creek Massacre. I'm sorry, Southern Cheyenne. I was so worried I would block and reverse, and there I did it. I'm so sorry. Southern Cheyenne. He's a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, where he served in the Vietnam War, if I understand correctly, which made him eligible for the Bowstring Society of the Southern Cheyenne, for which he now serves as the chief headsman. Gail Ridgely, Northern Arapaho descendant representative. He's also a former school principal at Wind River College. Both of them were very important to our process in the John Evans Study Committee, and obviously in the Healing Run and other commemorative activities. Chancellor Rebecca Chopp, speaking to take the last, or one of the last lines at the end of the last panel, speaking of a circle being incomplete without women, our Chancellor Rebecca Chopp came to DU in 2014, and we were very happy to have her join us, serving Swarthmore College from 2009 to 2014, and before that she was the president of Colgate University, and also held high administrative positions at Yale and Emory Universities. She holds an MDiv from the St. Paul School of Theology and a PhD from the University of Chicago. She's also a well-respected scholar who's written on the future of liberal education, on liberation and political theologies, and on feminism and theology. Tom Wolfe, next to Joe, is Iliff School of Theology's 14th president and chief executive officer. He also serves as elected senator of the University Senate of the United Methodist Church and is serving as its president from 2013 to 2016. Tom participated in the regular conversations between first Chancellor Bob Coombe and then Chancellor Chopp and Bishop Elaine Stanovsky regarding all three institutions' efforts to commemorate the sesquicentennial of the Sand Creek Massacre. If you don't know, those three institutions, the United Methodist Church, Iliff School of Theology, and the University of Denver, are all very deeply tied historically, and so our leaders have a regular conversation as part of those institutional relationships. He also worked with students to create public forums on the massacre at Iliff. Wolfe also served on the Governor's Commemoration Commission, opened Iliff's archives to the public, and helped shepherd the process of bringing to light this book that Iliff held in its custody, I guess, made from Native American skin, which Professor Tim Tinker has written about and published an article about earlier this year. Bishop Elaine Stanovsky, between the Chancellor and the President, is a distinguished leader in the United Methodist Church, and since 2008 has served as Bishop of the Mountain Sky area, comprising the Rocky Mountain and Yellowstone annual conferences of the UMC. She's represented the UMC on an interfaith peace mission to the Middle East, and in recent years has guided the United Methodists through a series of efforts to understand and confront the role of Methodist lay people and leaders, including John Chivington and John Evans, in the Sand Creek Massacre. She worked with Arapaho and Cheyenne leaders and the National Park Service to organize an educational and spiritual pilgrimage to the site of the massacre last year, which you may have read about in the papers. And the church also donated $50,000 to help develop the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site Research and Learning Center. She has overseen the commission of a full-length report by historian Gary Roberts on the role of the Methodists in not only the massacre, but generally, as I understand it, kind of U.S.-Indian relations much more broadly. And that will be coming out in this spring, we think.
Spring, May.
Yeah, well, since it's been winter so long. She's led the UMC to work very carefully and closely with the Sand Creek Massacre descendants, and also served on the Governor's Commemoration Commission. And finally, last but not least, Ernest House, two people to my left, heads up the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs, also sits on the Fort Lewis Board of Trustees. He is a member of the Mountain Ute tribe, and he is really the main person who, under the auspices of the governor's and lieutenant governor's offices, coordinated the commission on the commemoration of the Sand Creek Massacre for the state of Colorado. He is also a very important player in sort of behind-the-scenes negotiations around the governor's office issuing a formal apology. And so I'm going to ask him to speak a little bit more to that process as we go through it. So this is an amazing panel. I'm very grateful to be on it and get started with it. First, would anyone want to add anything to the list of sort of basics that are represented here through these institutions and nations? Anything else I didn't mention that's worth mentioning that you've been working on? Okay. So, Joe, Big Medicine, would you be interested in starting talking about responses from your communities in the Southern Cheyenne, descendant communities in general? Sort of what was it like to see some of these things happen? What was important?
The whole project has been important for the last 20 years, working with David Hallis a lot, Tom Meyer. We started from the state. We went to Federal National Park Service. When the state came out there and said the government's lost Sand Creek, can you help us go find it? So that's how I got involved. Chief Mayor Comasiva said he wouldn't go without me because of his doorman in the ceremony. So I told him, no, I'll go. So we've been at it ever since. We found Sand Creek. We know exactly where it's at. We know where the people were. We've been out there. It is there. It is there. I'd like some questions pretty soon too. I'll answer.
Bill, would you like to speak to this kind of initial question?
My name's Gil. Originally, Brother Rappo. Real quick, that history here. Got involved with the Sand Creek story back in 1992 when we went to Lamar. David Hellis, Lamar, there, Comasiva, Joe. Three others that are deceased now, but we talked to about the Sand Creek site and location and oral histories, what should come about. And 2 years later, my father met with his relations in Oklahoma and talked about the massacre. My father passed away 10 years ago, and he did a hide on elk hide on the Sand Creek massacre through that oral history that he met with his relations in Oklahoma. And getting back, 1992 is not very much history in the history books. I was a teacher and a school principal and got into curriculum, but I never did really understand, I guess, the process of assimilation to the non-tribal way. And when I got to find out, 1992, it stuck with me up to now, and it will always stick with me. The story, really horrendous. When I found out who my descendants that died and ancestors at Sand Creek died and survived, really bothered me. I read a dissertation by Dr. Roberts, and he's the one that's done a study with the Methodist. Really, he put his life into 40 years of the Sand Creek story. And it's not where you're going to end, but there's milestones to what we're doing. And I've been really involved ever since then to now. I never thought I'd be even jobs that I've held with state and public and tribal. I've always had to come to the meetings on request from the Business Council, Northern Upper Business Council, through resolution to Sand Creek and other NACPRA issues. And when we got getting back to now to acknowledgement of the people that we worked with, it started back in 1998. President Clinton signed the Sand Creek National Historic Sites Act, October 6, 2000. And I'm honored to meet Ben Nighthorse Campbell, who was a strong leader that stepped up for the tribes to request the study for the location. And it started back then when the legislation came out. And the National Park Service was somewhat the caretaker of the site itself. As Bill explained, land was purchased through the Cheyenne of Oklahoma. Presently, there's about 2,400 acres that's there. Very interesting when we had this last panel. This guy was talking about lands. It's, getting back to that, mine popped open because when doing the research and the studies and oral histories, my father was talking with some people and here at an informal meeting, and it was brought up that the Arapaho people in his band lived here in Cherry Creek. That was the land that was given to them. And at that time, the gold miners came in. People moving west, they stopped down at the Capitol there. And interesting thing that came out was that he took care of his band people. Then when the gold miners came, they requested Little Raven if they could stay in his camp with them. Little Raven said, well, I'll go ahead and camp. You camp here and get all your gold, then you could leave, you know. But I like a little humor on the side, you know, they've been here ever since. You know? And my grandfather, great-great-grandfather had to leave, you know. And that's when everything fell apart. Moved out of the area, you know. Everything came. But as Mr. Steve Brady once said, Sand Creek is not a dead history. It's alive, sacred. You go down to that site, and we as tribal people feel energy, we feel sadness, we feel strength. It's always good because when we go down there, and when I hit a certain area near in Sand Creek, I know it's like almost home. I get a good feeling. But again, one experience we had was my younger brother, who's a representative too, but he couldn't make it here today. We're walking around the site and our feet were burning. So we had to leave. There was still beating around and talking what we got. We left because the ground was so warm. And we're told by our ancestors that blood's still there. Our medicines are still there. They were burned. You hear the stories and you read the stories where when the soldiers came in, they only kept lodges where they keep their wounded. They took every position of our tribal people, piled it up, teepees up to buffalo robes. All the dry meat that they had stored for winter was piled up there. And the saddest part that gets me is because I heard that all of what they told was Gary Roberts. So the medicines, pipes of the tribal people were thrown on top of each area where they burned the material. And they were burned to crisp. And it's still there in the ground, you know. Traditionally, we believe that strength, you know. So when we go down there, we get a blessing. We can forgive, but we can't forgive. This is where we're at today. Today, all these entities come in together, and so it's sort of like a real good network, and everything's set in cogs. The tribes work under a government process. We do have resolutions, that's our laws. To meet state, federal, and other agencies, it always has to be government. And to strengthen our unity here, we met the whole year, we planned 150th. Remember, I learned, we learned together, there's much that has to be done yet. Healing is alive and well. No. I feel it. And I feel it for my grandchildren. So this project didn't come about. I wouldn't even know the story. My grandchildren, I want them to know the story. I can feel they continue to remember us. The Sand Creek friends. That's the healing part. One part of it. a lot of emotion. We started out with the MOU, Ernest and Margaret, Ella. Pardon?
Can you explain the memorandum?
Yeah, the memorandum of understanding is between the tribes, the state, DU, and other organizations that in this particular situation came together as far as History Colorado, trying to change, improve the story which was put out, but not correct in our mind, in the stories. So the governor took it upon himself to be a leader and get everybody together, as well as our bishop here at the university. Being objective, being objective that they want to do something to help with the Sand Creek project. And one group is not here today. Dr. Roberts is from the National Park Service. There's a lot of effort back since 1998. Been there. So we collectively. Oh, okay. She wants me to scream. I was getting real there. So okay. I was ready to cry. Okay. But my deep appreciation of working with all the entities to help the Sand Creek story. There's much more that's not told. There's much more work that needs to be done, and behind that is the healing part. Everyone's been pretty tight, working together, collaborating, meeting. And when it came to the 150th, everyone was there financially, physically, emotionally, and got that done. There's much more after that.
If you won't object, after those initial reflections, I'd like to, Chancellor Chopp has to leave this panel just a little bit early. And so what I'd like to do is go around from her end back toward me, starting with you, Rebecca, to think about some of these questions we're posing about what it means for institutions to try to grapple with histories like this. And I want to say one thing before I hand the mic over to you, which is that as the chair of the John Evans Committee, we actually decided, our old chancellor resigned, and we started the process of hiring a new chancellor right in the middle of our work. So we had no idea what that transfer of power might look like as it concerned the work we were doing. And Chancellor Coombe had really been convicted that it was time for DU to look at this history. He had read Gary Roberts' 1,000-page dissertation. He had made sure we were in touch with some key people, especially David Hallis and Dr. Roberts, and the tribes. So we didn't know what the next person coming in could provide, or whether he or she would even want to have anything to do with what we were we had in motion. I was so pleasantly surprised to meet Dr. Chopp when she was first brought on at DU, because the first time I met with her, she had already read the dissertation on the Sand Creek Massacre. She had already brought herself up to speed with the issue, and she really worked in a graceful and generous way with us as we let her know what we were working on, that it was potentially controversial, that it might get some people mad out in the world, that surely some people would not like that we were taking account of this history and the role in particular of our founder in it. So I want to recognize that you came into this process and graciously agreed to be part of the process without having started earlier when all of these other things were, the balls were just getting rolling. So what are your thoughts, Dr. Chopp, on sort of what it means to do something like this and what it means to be an institutional leader at a place that is doing this kind of work?
Thank you, Nancy. I'll say just a few things. Can you hear me? Is this working? First of all, I met with Dr. Coombe in July. I started in September. I was appointed at late June, I think, and so I flew out here and I had dinner with Dr. Coombe, and I was waiting for him to give me budgets. I was waiting for him to give me bylaws. I was waiting for all the things administrators would do, and he gave me only one thing, and that was a thumb drive with the Robert's dissertation on it. And he said, read this. So that was his gift to prepare me for all of DU. And so a testimony to Dr. Coombe, I think that was very deep, and I think he was very, very committed to both remembering for DU's journey of remembering and for participation. So by the time I started on September 1, there were all sorts of testimonies and witnesses and discussions. There was the John Evans, there were art, there were lectures in the history department, and it was a full and robust conversation. But it was just one snapshot or one moment. It really is, and this is my first point, it's a journey of remembering. We will never finish. We should never finish. And when I think of why it is important, I think I can boil it down for two reasons for me. First of all, it is on this soil, it is on this land. It is a history of this place. And I do believe that values and memories come up through the soil and through the land. And it's not just about abstract written histories in books. And I think we have to remember because it is here. And it is, comes up through us. And then the second point is we are an educational institution. And our role is to teach people to know their histories, to critique their histories, to be aware of histories, to transmit knowledge. We would fail terribly with our students and our faculty and our community if we did not realize our mission of remembering our own history, even as we want them to go out and learn the history of others. So I think my first point of what it means for me is it is about who we are, this place, and the many layers of this place. And also, it is a mission. It is what we do as an educational institution. My second comment about what it means and also what challenges there are is words and images both convey but are always limited. They will never express fully. I think this is more true when we come to events of suffering than any other time. It was powerful to hear the governor give that apology. Probably one of the most powerful moments I've ever witnessed. And it's been powerful to hear the presentations and the lectures. But words really do fail to convey the horror and tragedy. And I think we always have to be mindful of that. Billy and I share an interest in poetry and testimony because sometimes the poetic conveys better than the abstract. But even the poetic never fully captures it. And because of that, I think it's important in an educational institution to also encourage different testimonies, different perspectives. It is good for people to have different ways to tell the story. And I think it's good to have the contestation about ways of telling the story. So as Chancellor, I will tell you, I've had calls from people who really love the Northwestern report and didn't like the DU report. And I've had calls from people who really loved the DU report and thought I should stomp up to Northwestern and tell that president that he really did a bad job. And I think that's okay. History is not fully known. I think we have to tell the truth, but I think we have to understand all words are limited. And that if we shut down a word, we may not have the next word. So there's always a balance in an institution, but I think we have to encourage a plurality of words. And then finally, my third point. So it is a journey, and we don't have the final word. We're never going to have the final word. If we have the final word, we'll probably forget. So it's dangerous, I think, to have a final word. But it's really important from my perspective to think about next steps. Because it's very easy when you have an anniversary of any kind to put it then on the shelf, or if you create a memorial, then to never look at it again. So we have, as a community, established a task force, and we call it the Task Force on Native American Inclusivity. We debated the terms, but that's what we called it, and Billy and David Greenberg, where's David, are the co-chairs. Nancy and others are on it. And this task force is to think about the journey of remembering, how we continue. It is also to think about how we support our Native American students, our staff, our faculty. It is to think about financial aid, but also how to help people thrive when they're here, and how to create better partnerships and relationships through an MOU and other means. So I think it's important not simply to look back, but to always try to move forward, even as we're remembering.
Well, I'm not from here, and so I became the bishop of the United Methodist Church, centered in Denver, in 2008, and I oversee churches in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah, but I've never lived in any of the 4 states before I arrived. I had been here in 1996. When the International Conference of United Methodists met downtown, and an apology was issued for the Sand Creek Massacre. But I didn't know any of the history at the time. I didn't know where it had come from. I didn't know why the Sand Creek Massacre and not 150 other massacres or atrocities that had occurred. But the name, Sand Creek, is in my head. So all these years later, I come back in 2008 to be the bishop and oversee these churches. Now, 2008 is the year before 2009, right? 2009 is the anniversary of the 4 oldest churches in my area. And those are all within an hour and a half of Denver. And so in 2009, I preached in 4 churches that could trace their histories to 1864. I never got the connection between those 4 churches and the arrival of Methodism in this land to the massacre. It was only in the following year, in 2010, when I was invited to meet with Steve Brady and Otto Braided Hair at Montana Jack's in Billings, Montana, right? You know it. And these 2 Northern Cheyenne friends began to tell the history of the massacre and what it meant for the Cheyenne people in particular. That the lights started going off in my head, and I realized that in those 4 churches I had told the rugged pioneer story. I had told the narrative that my family had brought down for 150 years about Methodism in this area, which was people from Kansas and Nebraska and Missouri struggled to make ends meet in drought times and difficult circumstances, I told that narrative. And what I discovered in those conversations that began with Steve and Otto that day was that history is the story of us writing narratives about things that happen. And it's political, and it's social, and it's even spiritual, the way we write those narratives. They serve purposes. And after 150 years, I was sitting at a table with another community of people who had written a very different narrative about this time and these events. And I realized then how very difficult it would be, and absolutely important for us to sit together and learn one another's histories. And it was actually in that same period of time that Otto Braided here just looked at me and shook his head and said, your people need to know their history. And I realized then that this was not St. Creek. While we referred to it, we talked about it, it was not part of the history. The apology that I had been present for in 1996 was another wound. I had no idea. It was another wound because it had been developed without conversation with descendants of the massacre. It was, referring back to the earlier panel, it was one of those, gosh, we're sorry moments. And there was tremendous disrespect communicated in the issuing of that apology. And so, this is to the question about why is it important and how do you go about in leading an institution to come to grips with this kind of history. The basic narrative for us was the Sand Creek Massacre, for Methodists, was the Sand Creek Massacre was unfortunate but necessary. The story was told in the context of skirmishes back and forth, of small atrocities committed back and forth between Native American people and settlers who had come in, with none of the historic perspective of who owned what and what rights who had at the time that the massacre occurred. And so, very personally, I began to try and understand this history and learned. Otto Braided hair said two things that I will never forget. The first was, your people need to know their history. And the second was, you must take your people to the site of the massacre. And so the deep learning for me, and this goes to a comment from the earlier panel as well about decolonization. I've referred to that process on a personal level as decentering. Taking myself out of, taking my perspective and what I think I know, and the way that the narrative has come to me, taking it out of the center, and inviting, just responding to other voices who have a very different narrative, and letting those be at the center. And so, going to the site, taking 700 United Methodists in big red Trailways buses last June to the site with descendant hosts to tell the story was an act of moving out of our comfort zone. United Methodists thought we were nuts to go out on the plains, and I knew that the anxiety about this trip was crazy when they were worried about whether we were going to have hand sanitizer on every bus. We're going to drive from Pueblo, Colorado, 2 hours out onto the plains, and we need hand sanitizer. Are you kidding me? But there was this, it was, for me, a symptom of how anxious we were about leaving the narrative that we thought we knew, traveling to a place we hadn't been, in the presence of people we didn't know, and listening to the story. So it's been an amazing journey for us, and I just want to say, I was nervous about this. When Otto said you have to take your people to the site, I don't know how my people are going to respond. I don't have control over 800 or 700 United Methodists. They can behave badly. I've seen it. They do it with me all the time, right? And I didn't want to have another episode of harm, right? I didn't want to take them and have them disrespect the people who are our hosts or the land and the history. I didn't want that to happen, and so we worked hard to prepare. But in the end, here was my great learning about my own tribe, if I can say that. It was that given half a chance, they want to know the truth, and they want their lives to matter, and they want their church to engage in significant healing relationships. That's just a little glimpse. There's lots more.
I came to awareness of this actually before I arrived at Iliff. I was making an official United Methodist related visit to this university and met with your previous Chancellor, Chancellor Kuhn, and the bishop during that visit. And I heard a long narrative about the importance of this observance that was to come, and it was still years away, literally. And so when I came to Denver and I had the opportunity to take the position at Iliff, I was already aware of that. But I was also aware of something else. Iliff is different, a little bit differently located in this discussion. We don't share the Evans history directly, but we are United Methodist related, so we are part of the denomination. And as your Chancellor has just said so eloquently, we are also part of the land. Every square inch of the United States, what we call the United States, is in question in terms of ownership and who resides there. And so we are part of that. We have to be part of that. An institution that claims to have social justice as a core value in it has to also embody that in some significant way. But there was something else that I was aware of about Iliff, and that is close to the time that it was founded in 1892, a gift was given to Iliff of a book. It was a history of Christianity, and it was bound in the skin of a Native American. And Iliff was given that book, but we also need to say that Iliff received that book. A choice was made to take that book into its collection. And it's had a very nervous history about it, but really the first 80 years wasn't a nervous history. It was actually on display in the front foyer with a note. This book is a ancient book. A book dates back to the 1600s. So it's a valuable piece of a book as books are measured, but it was displayed almost carnival style because of its exoticized nature. And so it was not until 1974 a student looked at it and was aghast, and a conscience rose about the book. And there is a documented history about how the cover was removed with the assistance of a medicine man and working with the administration, and then the cover was repatriated. But here's the point. Documents were signed that sealed this moment into confidentiality. And so the nervousness begins around this moment in time. Well, how can we talk about it? But yet Dr. Tinker, appropriately, is teaching about it every term. It's out there. So I knew that this anniversary was coming up. And I also knew of the existence of this book. And it was just time for us to walk closer to the book, walk closer to the history of it, and start talking about it as an institution in consistent ways so that we can then have our soul at the same time as we have working toward this truth. And not that we can resolve this issue quickly, easily. We shouldn't. It shouldn't really ever be over. But to be faithful to it. And so we have one of our responses in the wake of Sand Creek is to formulate a group of students and others to begin to think about this book, and we're not going to be thinking about it alone. We're going to be inviting the Native American community. We have already begun a conversation with Otto Braided here, who has been with us in the library, and so that we can, no decisions about this book without everyone at the table. The book remains without a cover in our collection. The cover has been repatriated, but the memory of that book still lingers, and the decision still lingers. So, we are in that process. I think sometimes institutions think of things in upside-down ways. I think all of a sudden we find ourselves in an uncomfortable place in history, or something uncomfortable occurs that we have participated in, and we then go into this mindset of groupthink, institutional think that says we've got to protect the institution. And then we do the wrong thing as a form of protection. But the reality is, it's the only thing that really will protect an institution is when it faces its own history square on and looks it in the eye and says, what is the truth here? And what are we going to learn from it? And then detach from outcome. Because it's really it's a very prescribed thing for institutions to attach themselves to an outcome and manufacture that outcome. But part of the discipline of learning is detaching from outcome in such a way that you really begin to open yourself up to really learning what it is. And then to not just stay in the cerebral realm of learning, but rather learn by the relationships that you bring into the learning process that expand the notions of how one sees the world and how the institution can be formed in new ways. And one of the things I really am loving about watching this Rocky Mountain Conference work and watching DU work is that there was a real intentional process of detaching from outcome. Part of the story is I hope you document this story, as guidance for other institutions who are dealing with slavery, or dealing with sexual assault, or dealing with other kinds of things that we tend to bury for protection rather than surface for the learning engaged in them. So this is a very powerful moment, and the thing I valued the most in being part of the commission, the Governor's Commission, is the relationships that have emerged out of it, that have opened doors and helped us move our institutions, be they states or learning institutions or tribal communities, together.
Joe, do you want to speak to that question before we hand it over to Ernest?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
Give it a second. It takes a second to come on.
Hello?
Got so many.
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
How do you make a wrong a right? How do you do the right thing? I seen a lot of literature on my email coming up this way last week and a half. What is the main goal? What is the main purpose of this turnout? What is the university going to do? To help us? How? Repatriations? How? That's why I'm here today. I want to know this answer. What can you do for us, for our people, our Cheyenne people, our Arapaho people, us? That's the main question I want to hear today. I want to hear it today before I do the hotel. Thank you.
Oh man, Mike Dugan with the Hoya. First of all, it's an honor to be with you all. Thank you very much. It's an honor to speak before elders of my tribe and other tribal communities. I also want to thank DU and Union for putting this together. And Tamara, absolutely, the staff and Chancellor for continuing this conversation. There's so much I want to share. about the last 2.5 years, but with the limited time, I guess first of all, I want to make sure and let folks know that the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs has been working with these particular tribes, Northern Cheyenne, Northern Arapaho, and Southern Cheyenne Arapaho, since the first Sand Creek Healing Month. Every year we've issued a state proclamation. We've issued it on the west steps of the Capitol every November. I've personally been there for the last 8 years issuing that proclamation on behalf of then Governor Owens, Governor Ritter, and then now Governor Hickenlooper. We've issued those proclamations in rain, snow, sleet, hail. We've been there. We've issued them when nobody was at the steps, and we've issued it when over 30,000 people witnessed it last December 3rd. I think since the very beginning, the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs has wanted to raise this issue on a much larger level. That's why we've been very involved, not just with History Colorado, but National Park Service, about the state of Colorado's role. I think that as we went into the preparation of this, I'll probably just quickly make sure and go back 2.5 years where I first got introduced to Bishop Stanovsky at a meeting at the Methodist Church just right across the street, where the tribal representatives had invited myself to attend that meeting, where I also met Mr. Wolfe and some other individuals from the community at this ad hoc group that had already come together. And at that meeting, the tribes, at the tribe's request, said, hey, you know what, this is a great group. Look who we have around the table. Do you think the governor would be interested in creating this commission on a statewide level? And I just kind of looked at him and said, well, hello, my name's Ernest House. Great to meet you. I'd love to look at working at this. And I said, yeah, let's do it. Let's see. And I remember when we pitched it to the lieutenant governor and the governor, it was a no-brainer. It was, yeah. We have the 150th commemoration coming up in 10 months. We need to be prepared for this. This is going to be a big spotlight on what Colorado will or will not do, and it's the time to do it. In my mind, I'm thinking, this is our one chance. This is our one opportunity. And I get anniversaries come and go. I get, commemorations of 25, 50, sesquicentennial, stuff like that. But it just seemed like everything was aligning. Everything was coming together. When you just looked at this group that had come together, it was fascinating. Just the individuals. That group would have never come together 150 years. That's why Sand Creek happened. Was because of those conflicts between each of those groups. And so at the same time, we presented we signed the commemoration, the governor signed the executive order to create the Sand Creek Massacre Commemoration Commission on March 27th, 2014. The same day we signed the memorandum of understanding between the organizations and the tribes, the first time ever that had happened. It was going on a good path. You could see it. From a Native perspective, there was good medicine behind it. And at that point, I think I knew, and other people in the community knew, that here's an opportunity to do this. After we pulled the commission together and we figured, okay, who should be on this commission, I remember having conversations with the governor's boards and commissions office, said, okay, who should be here? Who isn't on this group already that had already been formed? And I said, well, the military. The military's not here. Let's get the military. Who else? Community members. Obviously the tribes. We have History Colorado. We have the Methodist Church. The list goes on and on. 25 people later, and in fact, I don't know how many executive orders for creating state boards and commissions have had the governor and lieutenant governor be the co-chair. That was at their request. That wasn't direction. That wasn't a staff, hey guys, this will be, they said no. We're going to create this executive order and we want to be the co-chairs of it. we're going to share our co-chair role with the tribes. The other thing that this creation of that commission did that I thought was unique was that the governor's authority, one of them can be to create these executive orders, right? Appointing citizens of Colorado to be on these commissions. We just went ahead and said, why aren't we appointing tribal leaders? They're not tribal members, they're members of their own sovereign nations in other states, but they need to have an official role on here. So we figured out a way to extend the invitation to them to have an official role on there. That recognition, I think, of a government-to-government process starts there, and it starts in other areas, but it leads to bigger things. And I don't think that I truly believe this. I don't think maybe anybody at that time believed it, but I think it was preparing the state for what was about to happen. The big discussion of should or should not the governor apologize for Colorado's role. And I don't know if you want me to talk about that right now. I was just talking to Boulder High School 2 days ago about this, and it still fascinates me. Patty Calhoun, editor of the Westward, her last article on Sand Creek on covering this whole year covered a little bit of the topic. And part of it was because some of it's hard to share because at the moment I can remember it just like it was yesterday. But the night before December 3rd, well, even before that, when we created the commission, talking to the lieutenant governor, the governor, and staff, they're like thinking, what's the end result going to be here? Are we just pulling people to pull people together? But is it awareness? What's the end? What are we going to finally do? And my biggest thing is I don't want to waste anybody's time, especially the tribal leaders. Going through this process, this should result in concrete plans to move forward. We should align a process, steps to get us to where we need to be. The apology was kind of out here. It was kind of way out there. I remember talking to David Hollis and tribal leadership about, well, what do you think? Would the tribes even be interested in an apology? Before we even throw this idea out there, what would the tribes want? And I heard at one of the meetings that we had with one of the tribal leaders say, absolutely, we'd love to hear that. But I also heard the comments of, well, we'd love to hear the state, but we really would love to hear the federal government. And I said, absolutely, that makes perfect sense. So when we started talking about this to staff, to my colleagues at the Capitol, in the governor's office, a lot of them probably looked at me and went, you are out of your mind if you think that this is going to go, this is going to fly. I and others had a lot of support that said, other folks we walked into said, yeah, we're with you, we're right there, let's do it. A lot of them were surprised that it had never been done. And I think a lot of people were surprised that it had never been done. Not that, the usual thing as Native Americans, we know that it is buried on page 362 of a 572-page document that was issued in the late 1800s, right after the massacre happened, or, just much like legislation relates to Indian tribes today. But moving forward, having that apology process go, presented it. The governor, I think, in my opinion too, Governor Hickenlooper knew a lot more about Sand Creek than the other previous administrations. The fact that he had opened the wine coop downtown, he took it upon himself to research a lot of Sand Creek. And in fact, I remember the first time meeting Governor Hickenlooper and him going, do you know about Sand Creek? And I said, yeah, do you know about Sand Creek? And he said, and he went through some great detailed information that I was very happy to hear him say and hear him, the background that he had on it. So I knew he was coming from a different perspective. And so moving up into the process, we get ready for we've already had the commission meet for the last 10 months. We're prepared. We're getting ready for the 150th. He's going to talk. The last memo or last thing we wrote up to the governor's office was, okay, this is it. This is the opportunity to issue the final apology. And to his credit, it was his decision at the end of the day. There could be nobody else. In fact, At that time, the staff were all supportive. The night before December 3rd, this is December 2nd, we're meeting with the tribes at the Sheridan Hotel downtown. The idea was, the goal was to meet with the tribes beforehand and tell them, give them a heads up of what the governor was about to do. Everything was starting to move that direction. We just hadn't heard the final, yes, I'm going to go ahead and do it. But everything was moving that way. I was supposed to hear at 8 o'clock. We had met with the tribes, they didn't know it. But I'm looking at my phone every 30 minutes. 8:30 rolls around, nothing. 9 o'clock rolls around, nothing. 10:30 rolls. We get to midnight, and finally I just call my chief of staff and I said, what do you want me to do here? And he said, Ernest, everybody in the staff has been calling him, and he's returned nobody's phone calls. I don't know what that means. He said, he's not returning my phone call. Let's pick it up again tomorrow morning, bright and early, and we'll see. I remember going to bed that night, didn't sleep, had to be back at the Capitol at 4 a.m. to set up teepees. And I walk into the governor's office, first walk right in the chief's office, have you heard anything? No. He said, I remember he said, also back, he said, I don't even know if I have a job anymore because he's really not returning my phone calls, which is really bad. No text, no nothing. We're setting up for the event. People are starting to show up. Kept on checking every 30 minutes. Nothing. By this time, everybody in the staff knows what we were working on. And everyone's like, have you heard anything? Have you heard anything? And I said, no, stop asking. I don't know. You'll know as soon as I know. 15 minutes before he was supposed to walk out onto to the podium. Now, I'm not lying. 15 minutes before he's set to walk out of his office, straight up to the podium, and deliver his speech, the chief of staff comes up to me and says, we're ready to go. Are you ready? I said, yeah, I'm ready. And he said, oh, and by the way, he wanted me to tell you he's going to issue the apology. And he particularly said, and I've not told this to anybody, but he particularly said, we're not going to wait another 150 years for an apology. And as I was walking away, the chief of staff said, and just one more thing, he has a little twist to the speech. And at that point, I'm just like, wait, what? Wait, what? What does that mean? He said, I think you'll like it. And it explains a lot of the past 6 hours. And I said, okay, so we go through the process. He said, but the problem was now we know he's going to do the apology. And the reason why we wanted to talk to tribes the night before was to get a sense. I mean, do they want that? And this goes into the relationship I talked with Nancy about of apologies. How is an apology taken? The governor could go up there, deliver the apology, and not mean it. And people are going to know. You know if someone's going to issue an apology if they truly mean it or not. Well, if you don't mean it, it's worse than even issuing the apology altogether. Because now you're front and center, you're on the national stage, and it's okay. The second is, the tribes had every opportunity just to say no, turn their back, walk off the stage. And the third would be just not even doing anything at all. Not even issuing an apology, or if you issue it, them, the reaction, I guess, what it would be. Is it an apology if someone does not accept it? Those kind of questions our staff was going through nonstop. And it was finally just like, look, this is the right thing to do. No matter what it is, no matter what happens, this is it. So we get to that moment, he gives his speech, he gets to the point where he delivers his apology, but then right there, he says, which I think we all know now, that the reason why we weren't able to get through to him from midnight till 6 in the morning was because he took it upon himself to contact every living governor going back 40 years or 20 years. Governor Lamb, Governor Romer, Governor Owens, and asked them all why they did not apologize, and to get their response and tell them what he was about to do. And the fact that all of them, every single one of them, unanimously supported his decision to issue that apology meant volumes. And I told this to Nancy, or not to Nancy, but I told this to Patty Calhoun within the Westward. But after he was done giving that speech, we went up there. Right before he came out, I met with Otto and the tribal chiefs. I told him 5 minutes, he's about to walk out this door. I just want to let you know the governor of the state of Colorado is about to issue formal apology on behalf of the state of Colorado. And they all just started sobbing. And I think that moment is one of those moments that will always be there. And I never want to let that go. Because at that point, that sent volumes, not just for Cheyenne and Arapaho people, but for you people that were also forcibly removed out of the state of Colorado. My ancestors, other tribes and other states and other communities that were massacred, that there could be an opportunity for this discussion to move forward in a good way. And that's, in short, how the process went.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to thank everyone, first of all, for these sharings. I think they provide so much perspective and insight, I think, for all of us. And thank you also all for your leadership.